Let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaining and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're joined by a special guest. You know them, you love them, a return guest. We have Abe.
Yes!
Hi. Hello. I'm glad to be back.
Joining us for round two.
Oh my goodness, Abe, my pussy has hit the cunting fucking floor. How the fuck are you, babe?
I am so good. It feels so nice to see you guys again on camera. It's been a long time.
Oh, babe.
It's been a really long time.
Oh yeah, clarification point for the listeners who may not be aware at this point. We record everything on Zoom, so you can hear us, you can't see us.
That's right.
So allow me to describe Abraham for you now. He is in fact butt naked and covered in Queen Royal jelly. He's just making slow, soapy circles over his buxous bosoms and just sort of moaning softly. Like, you can't hear it because I'm a master editor. You can't hear this, but he's moaning softly into the camera, just sort of going like,
I need you all to know that I'm not going to be able to clean this royal jelly off of me for the next 3 days. So you will see me in this jelly in the next few days on social media.
We are in fact ready for this jelly for the next 3 days. We are.
What am I going to do with you?
This is the
dangerous combination.
My skill set is derailing this podcast. Oh my gosh. So
I'm just destined to be like the Ricky Ricardo to your Lucy, aren't I?
I see it. I definitely see it.
Yeah. This is the insanity, and Tim is just constantly sat there going,
I suppose in fairness, I'm more like the Ethel to your Lucy.
Like, I've never seen any of these older shows, but I always envision you like, and maybe this is a more modern reference, but it's more like Ab Fab. I'm Eddie and you are my Patsy.
I know.
Like, you're my slightly older friend with your like tower of like bleached blonde Ivanka Trump hair.
I would never rock a beehive.
I don't
I don't know. I think you could probably rock it.
I would never rock a beehive. In fact, speaking of, have you seen, there was this meme that I swear I started laughing hysterically when I saw it. It was like when man buns get out of control, and it was this just gigantic man bun that was all built up on this guy's head, and someone said, "This isn't a man bun, this is a he hive."
Rika O'Hara found scalped. Oh my god.
Oh my god.
So, Timbo, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about sounds and scents, basically what amounts to scent play, which I will admit I am not that familiar with.
I mean, it's probably one of the more, like, in my mind, I've always kind of visualized it as like a very sensual and intimate approach to gaining elements. Because it's more, well, maybe it's different for everyone, but like I envision it's things to do with like body musk, to some degree odor and stench. I think some people are into, there's gaseous elements with belching and farting and stomach gurgling noises. So I think there's actually quite a broad tapestry of things there. So,
I mean, I can definitely get into the musk thing because I am a pit pig, but that's about as far as it goes.
I mean, listen, we've all got our own flavors and preferences, don't we? So, hey, first question, like how do you think you would define kind of roughly things like scent play, things like belching and farting?
It is very hard to define. It is definitely something a little bit more intimate, I feel like. So you hit that right on the head. For the thing with things involving your like senses is that just like how everyone's sense is very individual, It's the exact same thing when it comes to things like kink and sex. So some people I know like sampling when it comes to musk and not things like farting and belching. Some people will only like farting and belching and not musk. You know, it's very individual as to how it is. Certain people like the idea of the dominance behind it. You know, it's like, this is, I'm smelling you, like, you know what I mean, or you're making me smell you, that kind of thing. So yeah, like it's all very individual. You know, some people do like the dominance aspect of it. Other people like the fact that it's an intimate situation that's happening. You're sharing in that moment together. So it really depends. But in general, it is a power play that's happening. You know,
I can understand that and respect, like, again, with the musk thing, because there's just something about that. I don't know. I mean, you know how they say, oh, you can't smell pheromones, but I swear to God, I feel like I almost can.
You absolutely can.
Well, because I remember there was this one guy that I would see a lot at the leather bar, and he was not a fan of deodorant, which didn't bother me because I like the scent of a man. And I could clock him from across the room, and like that scent would waft up to me, and all of a sudden it was like my body would heat up and I'd be like, ah, and I just start following him around.
I love that. I love that.
You know, it's funny when I think of scent. You know, it's like, there are parts of a man's body that I like when it's, you know, musky, not a fan of. You know, like I'm not a fan of a musky butt. I'm not a fan of musky balls, like that kind of region.
Yeah, same
you
here.
know, but again, me personally, it's like I want that nice and like cotton field fresh. You know what I mean? I want you to rinse that, you know, with a little towelette. But for me, the pits, the armpits, whoo, baby. Like, and that's another thing. Like, I know that I've definitely been with guys where like all you're doing is like, back when I was skinnier, mind you, like laying on top of them and like kind of like nuzzling into them and like obviously getting like a good whiff. And like it would always line up. If I didn't like the guy's scent, I just thought he was an asshole. And if I loved that guy's scent, I was like pining for him on Grindr afterwards. It was like, I just want this man to come back into my bed, you know. So I think there is something very homely about that, you know, and maybe to take it in a bit of a strange direction, or maybe not, you know, maybe there's an element of like referring back to the parent with that. Because when you think about it, like when you're a child, like you're theoretically being breastfed or bottle fed, you're being cradled by the parents. Your head is in the crook of the arm and probably leaning into the pit. You're probably getting a whiff and a scent of like what your parent smells like. So there probably is something very familial, we come back to this point, very territorial, intimate, and therefore sensual and romantic as well about that.
So what I have heard online is that if for a lot of people, when they smell like the sweat of their family members, right, like your siblings or your parents, whatever, that's not attractive. That's like, a lot of people are like really adverse to smelling your own family member's sweat for obvious reasons. Apparently, I'm no scientist. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just repeating what I've heard. That is like evolutionarily on purpose. So if you are repulsed by someone else's smell, there's a higher likelihood that like you guys are more genetically related than someone whose smells you do enjoy, allegedly.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, that's why I didn't fuck that dolphin that one time, you know, because I just smelled the sweat and I was like, no, it's too much.
Well, I mean, and from like an evolutionary standpoint, that makes sense that you
Right.
would be adverse to that, because obviously mating is what it's related to on some level, and you wouldn't want to mate with a sibling because of not just but because, you know, any offspring could carry deformities. So it makes sense that that's like a primal holdover from, you know, when we were more tribal, I guess.
Also, who is out here saying that they can't smell pheromones? Who's out here saying that they cannot, like with their fucking stuffed nose, you know? Is it the English? Is that why their food is so bland? Like, I don't understand. Like, is that where this comes from?
Well, scientists say that pheromones are subliminal, that you cannot smell something and say, oh, I catch the whiff of their pheromones. Like,
Right.
It's supposed to be all like untraceable by your actual olfactory nerves, but like,
Right.
subliminally it's hitting you. I don't know. I'm not a scientist.
I mean, just because you can't smell the actual pheromone doesn't mean that you can't recognize what you enjoy when you do smell someone else, right? So like maybe there's a connection there. I don't know. I'm not a scientist either.
Neither am I. However, we are not a podcast that relies on fact and information. We are only here to spread lies and conjecture.
That's true.
So
We're a speculative podcast only.
Exactly. And isn't that like where most of the fun comes in anyway, is just like spreading lies, just slanderous lies about people. No, we are informative, damn it. But this, I think, is interesting because obviously we've all kind of expressed we exist at different points on this spectrum of appreciation, shall we say, for scent and the intimacy there within. And we can all kind of recognize almost the exact same attraction and method of assessment and things that we like in that thing when it comes to how we apply it to other individuals. So I find that really interesting, almost that there's maybe limited ways to do it, but 101 different ways to experience it, which is kind of crazy.
Oh yeah, 100%. 100%.
What do you think sets someone who's into things like stomach noises, scent play, belching, farting, what do you think sets that type of gainer apart from other gainers?
It really depends how much you're into it, if that makes sense. So I think like scent play and sound play are united in the fact that they both relate to your physical senses and how you use them, as does anything else really that involves kink and your body, right? You're using your senses to find pleasure in what you're doing. Those things can be together or they can be separate. I know people who, like I said, like all the scent stuff, but not the sound stuff. People who like the sound stuff and not the scent stuff. What sets, I think, a person apart within the fetish world in that environment, as relating to gaining, is if that's incorporated in their gaining either at all or passively or actively. I know people who love the idea of like feeding and stuffing and eating a lot of food and being really big and all this, but hate the idea of like belching. They don't like it. They actively avoid doing it. I know other people who are okay with it passively, as in like, oh, it's cute, like you finished a meal, whatever. And there's people where that's all that matters. So it really depends where you are on that spectrum, how you're, even like how the way that you gain and interact with weight gain can change, if that makes sense.
No, that makes
more about that.
That makes perfect sense. And I think it's almost, you can see the immediacy of certain things. Like someone who's really into belching will probably have a lot of fizzy drinks, a lot of soda.
Right, exactly.
Encourage that. Someone who's into farting is probably going to have a lot of, to be stereotypical, spicy foods and things that will try and like encourage certain responses. And I would imagine for like a gurgly stomach, you'd want to have something very greasy.
Yes.
Because I know from my experience, that's usually when I hear the old tank like, it's usually when there's a lot of excess oil happening up in the mix.
It all like, even a small thing like that can just change the entire experience of how you interact with the kink community at all in general.
I mean, I think it's, again, one of those things where like, maybe for some gainers, they're only dipping a toe into it. They're only like, oh, it's just a casual thing. Who cares? Whatever. It's not make or break. But actually, there could very well be an entire community, much like gaining itself, around belching and farting, scent playing itself, where gaining is the ironic dip a toe crossover. So I kind of love that. It's almost like Marvel's multiverse theory, like in another reality where the sort of casual like side kink that people are like, some people are into this, some people are not, like blah 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 blah.
We've talked about this before, but like the like map of kinks and like that like world map of kinks.
Yes.
Some of them are just really adjacent, and depending on where you live on that map, you'll see the other ones across the street, but you won't really interact with them as much. That's really how it feels like. That's 100% how it feels like.
I think everyone we've shown that map to has also found it so fascinating to kind of like trace things along and be like, who do we link up with?
Yeah.
Like in the spectrum of sexuality, like where do we fit? And to be honest, I probably found it so fascinating that gaining and size and macro and all of these things really took up like a solid quarter of the entire map, to the point where I was like, we sit here and we're like, we're so strange and weird with our gaining fascination. How could anyone in the world possibly understand us? And yet, apparently, 1 in 4 kinksters is in some way, shape, or form a kink cousin who probably, if you sat down with them and explained gaining, they'd be like, oh, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not so different.
Kinky cousins.
Kinky cousins.
So
it's only kinky if you fuck your cousins.
So I can absolutely talk about that with regards to myself as well, because like I've definitely seen a lot more like how those environments, how those kinks cross over in many different ways. So I am very into belching. I'm very, very open about it. And it's interesting how like I'll make content like online and stuff, and the people that will comment are either people coming in specifically looking for like belching content. There's a whole community online specifically just for belching.
Right.
Then occasionally like they'll be like, oh, you're also a gainer. Okay, cool. Not what I'm into, but sure. On the other hand, there's the gaining community, and that happens the opposite way. It's like, oh, you're also into this. Okay, cool. I'm not into that, but you know, I like what you're blah, blah, blah. And it's really interesting seeing like how that crosses over so frequently, and yet it feels so separate.
I'm gonna ask, can you belch on command?
I can. That's almost all I ever do.
Can you give us a sample?
Yes, I definitely can. Give me a second. I gotta have some water because my throat's dry.
Ladies and gentlemen, she's lubricating. It's sort of like, I feel like I'm a presenter at the Olympics where I'm like, and yes, and she's stretching, and we're getting ready for the final hurdle. Oh, wow.
That's impressive.
Thank you.
I mean, girl, even the fact that like it tapered away, but I'm sitting here like, oh no, you were like 3 times the distance from your microphone, and that's
yeah. Well, I also have to make the comment that was fairly small compared to what I usually do.
Sure. Oh my god.
I'm always fascinated by people who can control their diaphragm to that extent. Like I can't do that, you know. And I know that's really what it is like being able to control your diaphragm. And I can't, you know, being a part of the gainer fetish and having been fed by people, like there are people who expect me to be able to burp on command just to satisfy them. And I'm like, it's just going to come when it comes. I cannot control it, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yeah, I think we circle back to expectations in gainer interactions a fair bit. And I feel like the more we talk about it, the more obvious it becomes, where we just sit here and it's like, just fucking stop. Like, here's our episodic segue where we have a segment where James goes, stop putting pressure on people to perform your monkeys. Just sit down, have a coffee, don't even have a beer, meet for a coffee like a normal human and get to know them before you start projecting your shit. Like, just dial it back.
If you want something, sexually or otherwise, there has to be a conversation. This is what I'm into. This is what I want. If someone else can't satisfy that for you, either find another person or find another way to have that conversation and cooperate in making the experience enjoyable. But do not force other people to do something they're not comfortable with. That's, yeah.
Absolutely. Again, I circle back to the dolphin experience. You know, things didn't work out and we moved. Abe, your face.
I'm bringing up the fucking dolphin.
Okay, also, here's the thing. I'm Australian, and therefore, my humor is, you know, some people say like a British sarcasm is like a dry white wine. I think I would refer to like Antipodean sarcastic humor as like sand. Just like, that's how fucking dry it is. And I feel like I make these jokes because, listeners, the dolphin situation is a joke. And in my mind, that's clearly a joke. And yet I've had people approach me about certain things that I say with a tone that conveys the idea that they didn't know that I was joking. And I have to sit there and go, I was being humorous, doll. And I just, I can never I can never have a joke with those people because I'm just looking at them going, no, anything I say is just going to go right over your head, Poppet. It's not gonna pan out for us. No, it's not gonna work.
If it helps, your sense of humor is very similar to a lot of Latin American sense of humor. So if you ever learn Spanish, you would be a hit in Latin America.
I mean, I feel like we've had this conversation as well.
Yeah, several times.
The conversation about like you talk about like your Latin, and I'm like, am I actually Latin? Am I actually a Latinx person? I think so. I'm just separated from the continent. I must return to my people because honestly, while we all understand the appeal of a big round belly, is the appeal of these kinks maybe related to the consumption of food and the result of that process?
Is the appeal of like the kinks that we mentioned before, like belching and farting and all that stuff. Yes. Okay.
Which almost seems a bit like self-explanatory, but I think maybe in this instance it's kind of probing more the sense of like the goal of the gaining interaction. Like the goal of a feeding session for many gainers is to wind up the sensation of feeling full and to have potentially gained weight because of the calories of what they've consumed.
Right.
You know, the output at the end of it is, oh, I have walked away fatter. Whereas perhaps is the intention of someone whose focus, scent, sound, belching, farting, simply to make it happen.
Right. So, yeah, I definitely feel qualified to answer this because I've been on both kinds of situations where like I've met with people specifically for like a gaining experience to find the enjoyment, sexual or otherwise, in the experience of feeling full, feeling fatter, feeling larger, bigger, all of that. And as enjoyable as that is very different from the experience I have if I'm like loading on purpose or loading specifically because someone wants to hear me belch or something, where the appeal of the big round belly signifies something else. You know, like if you are stuffing yourself, eating on purpose, that being the main event, so to say, the appeal is the fact that you're gaining mass, you're being larger in that way. In something along the lines of, say, like loading to belch or something like that, that appeal is that like you're full of it and like you're going to let it out and it's going to be loud and strong and like boisterous, and that's the appeal. So it's the same body part, same kind of dynamic, but different thought behind it in a way. So,
yeah.
You know?
Makes a lot of sense. So we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I actually kind of want to give it a very specific platform right here on this episode. Farting. Because, and you know, we were talking about this before we started recording, you know, it's probably in the spectrum of like all gainer concepts we're ever going to cross, it's probably one of the more taboo ones where people will feel they don't want to have to listen to this subject or talk about this subject in depth. And of course, we don't have to labor on it, but I think the simple fact that we had that conversation and we can acknowledge there's a sense of discomfort there, I think proves the point that there therefore needs to be a very specific platform given for it. Right. So I want to open up the floor to you for this opportunity. Farting. Discuss.
Thank you. It is, so I've talked with a lot of people about different kinds of kinks, especially those involving like sounds and scents and all that stuff. Belching is always a kink that most people are kind of okay with. Like if it happens, it happens, like whatever. Farting is very much, if you mention it, I don't want to deal with it. Yeah. I have had people who I know are very much into farting ask other people, hey, can this be a thing that we do? And the reaction isn't just, oh no, thank you, I'm not into that. It's hell no, I'm not doing this. This is weird. Which is interesting considering the fact that we're all into whatever we're into. There really isn't anything weird that we're all into. Like we're all into our own shit, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it is that like there is that taboo of like just general farting in society,
Yeah.
That seeps itself into gaming. I know people who are into farting in conjunction with everything else, that we pretty much see it as like the like unifying thing when it comes to like slobbiness, to being like fat and lazy. And for a lot of gainers, that can be part of the fantasy, or like part of like the actual moment that's happening. For some, that is not what they want at all, and they see that as that connection, and they don't want to like discuss it, and they'll sometimes ostracize other people, for it. So that's kind of how most people see it. Personally, I'm the kind of person that like, it's not necessarily my largest fetish. However, I am very good at it, because you just heard how I belch. The same thing happens in the back.
Yep.
Absolutely. So I am very much here for pleasing others. It's not a thing of judgment from me necessarily, but I have felt it from other people who have seen my content, and they're like, oh yeah, this is a thing that you do. Why? And it's like, there doesn't need to be a reason, because we're all into shit, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, it's definitely very stigmatized.
It makes a lot of sense. And, I reflect on my own, maybe this will sound weird, my own journey with farting. Like, I can reflect on being pre-gains, the kind of size where, look, I'll put it out there, my ass cheeks were nothing to look at truly. And I would often drop my guts without even noticing. There was no sound. There was no scent. There was no nothing. It would just kind of happen. I'd be like, oh, little, like someone like raked the leaves. You know what I mean? And then
fixed leaves.
Like who's raking the leaves at like 4 a.m? Like that's kind of the vibe, if you can imagine it. But obviously as I've grown, my ass has become more substantial. And the weight of them, they sit together. So when you fart, yeah, they have to push apart. That's what makes the brr sound. It happens. And also, sometimes the scent, sometimes those elements based on what is going on in my diet. And let's be frank, the majority of us who are trying to gain weight are eating a lot of foods that, typically speaking, make what happens in that region a little bit more potent. Mm-hmm. And as much as that may not be someone's du jour conversation, I think it would be remiss of us to miss out on acknowledging that, because whether we're trying to achieve it intentionally or not, we are doing that to ourselves as a result of the natural gaining process. And I don't know, as I say, I think it's one of those things where when I reflect on it, it isn't my thing, but I do find it curious, the kind of biases that we hold on to, and maybe there's a question of where it comes from and what it represents for us, and maybe signposts to something we can challenge ourselves on as a community. Just to say that. Timbo, what about you?
Full disclosure, I don't know how much I can add to the conversation. It's kind of my kryptonite, really. There is a certain line of things that I just don't cross, and that's one of them. No judgment whatsoever. If it's what you're into, it's what you're into. You can't help that. But like for me, it's not my bag. It's not my bag. Like if we circle back around to the belching thing, something I've noticed about myself is the older I'm getting, like, no one tells you that after you hit 30, you start to develop all kinds of health problems. But, like I think I have GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disorder, because I can have a completely empty stomach and I will still belch, and I think it's because it has to do with I should know this actually as a medical professional, but I'm forgetting. It's something to do with the stomach sphincter and the proton pump and how they start to malfunction, and you belch even if you have an empty stomach, which is super annoying. Like to just be, first thing you get up in the morning and you're trying to go through your morning routine and you keep belching and you're like, what the fuck? And then you're like, oh shit, I forgot to take my Prilosec. But But the opposite end of things, everything that comes out the backside is a sort of no-go for me.
But again, I think that's fair. It comes down to consent and respect in the conversation as well.
Of course, 100%. It all comes down to respect and consent.
Hmm.
Also, quick aside, Tim, I also have GER.
Oh, you do?
I've had it for years since I was like a teenager.
Oh,
Like,
okay. So you had it like way before, because I only recently developed it after I was about 35 when it happened.
Abe is
I was
also,
17.
I was about to say, Abe is confessing he was 35 years old in high school. He's all the truth
However,
coming out now.
However, I did have sleep apnea long before I gained weight. I had sleep apnea as a teenager and didn't know it. Well, and I didn't know that because like you're a teenager, you're like no one like your parents aren't walking into your room shaking you awake going, hey, you stop breathing. You know, it wasn't until I was 25 and my ex-husband was complaining of you stop breathing in your sleep. You need to go have something done about that I went and did the sleep study.
Exact same thing happened to me too, Tim. We're the same person.
Do these subgroups relate to a larger odoriferous fetish?
They can, yes. I think, especially when it comes to, okay, so most of the people that I've met that are into like belching, because that's not my thing, aren't really into the odor as much as the sound. The sound is mostly what people are into. When it comes to farting, that is definitely much more of the odor. And I feel like that does fall into like scent play specifically. In a lot of ways, very similar to like smelling armpits and all that stuff, except much more taboo in general society, if you will, you know. So yeah, I would say they definitely, they definitely relate to a larger community that may be there.
I'm kind of curious because we haven't really spoken too much on the sound element. Like obviously there's belching and farting, like you hear it, but let's say specifically things like stomach noises. I feel like I personally have mostly heard the concept of stomach noises being spoken of in conjunction with vor.
Yes.
So in the fantasy, the person or beast, whatever the situation is, has been consumed. The stomach gurgle noises are either the person being digested or it's them struggling to get out, but it's just coming out as gurgle noises, rah-de-rah. Like that tends to be where I mostly hear about it. Do you find that it's mostly an accompaniment to something like vor, or just like with scent play and everything else, is it that same kind of ironic crossover where maybe in the gaining vor side of things, it's a little element, but actually there's a whole huge contingency over here who's like a little bit into vor?
That's what it is.
Yeah.
They're like neighbors on the map. I feel like when it comes to gaining, I've met people who are into like stomach sounds and gurgling and all that stuff that want absolutely nothing to do with vor. Like they will feed you and they will stuff you specifically to hear your stomach.
Right.
Which I'm here for. Like I love that shit, definitely. And then there are people that are into vor, that the idea of stomach noises are directly related to like eating someone and like having them be in you. And there comes the like power play into it, right? Like you are large enough, you are dominant enough to eat someone and you can hear them struggling inside you. That's where that comes into play. It's, I can see the appeal 100%, 100%.
Totally.
It's also, I do want to say, it's very nice to just hear a stomach do its shit like after a big meal.
I've always been fascinated by like sloshing, like not as like a kink per se, but certainly like if I've had a lot to drink, like if I've had like several cups of coffee, several cups of tea, and it's just full of like milk and sugar and calories, and there's something like just being able to lay back and like just gently jiggle the belly about and just hearing it all kind of go. And I don't know, there's almost this weird like I've become the waterbed. Like
I love that.
I don't know, it's interesting. It's interesting, and I think in conjunction with discovering how your body does new things as you grow.
Right.
It's things that you wouldn't normally discover, things that you, like I've said this before about my earlobes. Like I used to have ears where the earlobe would go straight down, but now they flare out because of the fatty deposit at the back of the ear that pushes it out. I got fat earlobes, girl.
Got fat earlobes, girl.
Got fat earlobes, girl. That's when you know you're fat, when you've got fat earlobes. Hey, Abraham, may I please state your earlobes so I can see if they are fat?
My earlobes are in fact very fat. Actually, when I got my ears pierced, my piercer did tell me that my earlobes were larger than usual. So it was going to be a little bit harder. Yeah.
Your earlobes are literally fucking obese. Put the fucking fork down and stop feeding those fucking earlobes, you fat fuck. God.
Exactly what she said. And then I was like, no. Pierce them.
Exactly. And then you were just like shoving food into your earlobes.
Right.
Ease, my little precious. Ease. Oh my gosh.
Oh my god.
Maybe that should be the milestone for determining your weight gain. If you got fat earlobes. I don't know. People go on about inches on the waistline with numbers on a scale. Like, wouldn't it be fun just to sort of throw all that out and say, nah, earlobes?
I do have to say, I like the terminology you use for yourself as you feel like a waterbed. I think I'm going to start describing myself like a waterbed.
Oh, you definitely are. Because as someone who got the delicious pleasure of having a slight opportunity to, just that one time, that was truly wonderful. The Lord blessed me that day. It was glorious.
I so appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Oh my God. Okay, so hang on. If you're a waterbed, the new Grindr profile, you have to set it up like an Airbnb.
So funny. God.
Oh my gosh. No, but you do. Oh, okay.
I'm going to on Grindr. Yeah, I absolutely would do that.
That's it. That's the new marketing point. We're done. We're done here. Cut the podcast. We're now doing a marketing brand for gainers on Grindr. I'm curious to know, and look, I feel like this may be a bit of an obvious question, but we've got to put it out there for the children. Can you think of examples of belching, farting, scent play, stomach noises in mainstream media, especially 90s cartoons?
How much time you got? There is so much of it that I'm sure each one of us individually could recall. There's so much of it.
I mean, the 90s it was really the era of gross out humor.
Yeah.
That was really kind of a thing for kids. It was like the grosser something was, the funnier it was. Like that was the decade that gave us Nickelodeon Slime and Gak, which was another like putty gross thing. And it gave us like creepy crawlies, those gummy bugs that you could create, and Ren and Stimpy, like basically anything that was on that show.
Who was that chick who her whole thing was like wearing like overalls? She had a cap on backwards, and she could like melt herself and go under doorways.
Oh, Alex Mack.
I was thinking like Alex Jones, but no, it was Alex Mack. That's the one.
Alex Jones is a conspiracy theorist.
Oh, really? Okay. No, it is Alex Jones. Again, we're all about conspiracy here on the podcast. We're
false information.
Exactly, false information. It was Alex Jones. It was always Alex Jones.
So I have an interesting experience as to that. I'm technically like a zillennial, whatever the fuck that means. So I was born in 94. So I experienced the latter part of the 90s, especially in a third world country where we were already 5 years behind. And
same.
Right.
Yeah, again, Australia.
Whoa.
Australia is a third world country.
No, Australia is about 5 to 10 years behind the world, and then Perth, where I've grown up, is about 5 to 10 years behind Australia.
I believe it's Perth. I believe. So I saw some of the 90s media on TV, mostly in Spanish, but a lot of the media that I grew up with really came towards like the tail end of the 90s and the early 2000s. And even then, gross out humor was still very, very popular. I remember Ed and Nettie had several episodes where like belching and farting were involved. God, for a lot of people that are into belching, the Scooby-Doo movie was like a click moment. It's crazy. Yeah. The fucking Scooby-Doo moment.
Like Shaggy and Scooby in general.
Shaggy and Scooby.
Are you talking about the animated movies, or are you talking about
live action Scooby-Doo movie with like Fred Prinze Jr.? Yeah.
Yeah, that whole thing of it.
Yeah. So like that's another example that like a lot of people have talked about in the past. Just like 90s cartoons, early 2000s cartoons in general had a lot of that.
We actually spoke about this on an episode where we reviewed Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, sorry.
Yeah,
because obviously, and this was kind of the summation of the episode, obviously Violet Beauregard and the blueberry fetish was literally born out of this girl. Yep. But then we were like, actually, every child kind of touches on a gainer theme. Because Augustus Gloop was literally so fat, he got stuck in a pipe. Again, Violet Beauregard, blueberry. The middle one was meant to be Charlie, and that is where the belching comes in, because it was the bubbly
busy lifting drink.
Busy lifting drink, and the only way they could escape was by burping and belching. And I think they squeezed a fart sound effect in there as well, but like that was the idea. Like they would belch to get down. Veruca Salt being just greedy, bratty little girl, and then Mike TV, micro macro,
right?
Because he literally gets shrunk down to the whatever size they said he was. So it's true. But it's interesting that those elements have really been there since, like, it was 50 years ago this year with Willy Wonka. That's why we did the special episode. So 50 years people have been pumping out ideas into mainstream media. Like, the most, I will say, sexy in reference to this particular farting moment was in the Santa Claus, because I think for a lot of us that's where the inception fucking happened. And it's the morning that he wakes up, he sits on his bed, like he farts as he gets up, and it's that kind of like burp and shuffle off to the bathroom, and he goes, the beards come in, like he's jiggling his belly and like stepping on the scale, and it's kind of this cacophony of realizing that his body is changing. And I think that's where that kind of almost sexiness comes into it, that it was all very unintentional, and he didn't know what was going on. Very that. Yeah,
absolutely. There's this show, I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it. Maybe you have. I don't know how old it is. I think it came out, just check really quickly. When did this show come out? This show came out in 2001. Totally Spies. Do y'all remember that show?
Yeah, I remember hearing. I mean, like I'd seen bits and pieces, but never actually sat down to watch it.
Because there was a weight gain episode in Totally Spies.
Listen, the fucking French, every single episode in the show is a kink. There was a farting and belching episode in the show itself. There was a weight gain episode. There was a macro and a micro episode, separate episodes.
There was also a muscle gain episode, very specifically, where like the one, I forget her name. I think they drew her to be the brown or Asian.
Yeah, not Sam. Alex. I used to love the show.
Oh my God, it was Sam, Alex, and I can see her. That's the one. Clover. But I remember, like, I think she was dating a guy who was getting juiced up or something like that. She's like, I'm going to do this to go and save him. And then she does it, and she's like, that was like really crazy. Okay, Tim, we've got to add Totally Spies to your
She needed to watch.
Yeah, I think I was a little bit past the target age when that came out.
Oh, that's fine. Girl, Winx Club. You know what I mean? It's like, you knew that you were a little faggot boy when you were like, Winx Club, I want to get into this very fucking bullshit.
Oh, no, I knew I was a faggot when I got into She-Ra.
Oh
my God, new She-Ra. Oh,
well, I'm talking about original She-Ra. I'm talking about 1980s She-Ra.
Okay, 1980s She-Ra. Like, I watched a bit of that with you. I thought like that was way too much. Also, like, Boa's a white ginger with a porn stash and everything else. Like, I genuinely prefer him like as a brown, black, mixed race, whatever grade they were trying to go for, boy. Looking adorable and like a little bit dumb.
Yeah, he's kind of a himbo.
Do you know what I mean? Like just a little. And I was just like, oh.
I mean, I really like the new version of She-Ra, but for me, like growing up, actually watching He-Man and She-Ra, and I just thought that She-Ra had a cooler transformation. Like she holds aloft her sword, and all of a sudden, all this sparkles and glitter and fireworks come out, and she gains like a foot in height and like a foot in hair. And she's just like this big Amazonian kind of, and she, like her costume was really intricate, the headdress with the wings that came off of it, and I don't know.
I love
Yeah,
that.
watching the He-Man remake, like that was okay. I know they've only released half of the first season so far, but I'm very like, I don't know.
I've yet to see it. I've yet to see the He-Man remake.
It's
I saw the original one forever ago. I was really young, but
yeah, it's not She-Ra. You know, I think She-Ra is definitely yes, and I know that they're probably not going to make any more, but I would love it if they did. So you know, just saying, I could be a princess of power. I could be a diversity hire. They don't have any gingers, I've noticed. Disgustingly racist of them. You know, I could be somebody. I could have flame powers. That's
you could have flame powers.
Isn't that a bit on the nose, though?
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, but they made like the Inuit girl like have ice powers. So like I don't know,
Yeah.
you know, it's fine.
There is one more piece of media that I have to mention in regards to like weight gain and like belching specifically. Sam and Max.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah. So
Sam and
if
Max.
I didn't watch Sam and Max, actually, I think that was a bit before my time. It started off as a comic book in the 80s. And then it became a cartoon. So it's a dog and a rabbit. The dog is like a detective, and the dog is very obviously a larger character. There's this one episode that I remember where they were fighting like a monster that was also a TV dinner. It was
it was like a moldy TV dinner that had come to life.
And at the end, he eats it, and like he like gets really fat because it's this huge monster. And then at the end, he's like, my stomach hurts, and he like belches, and it's this huge like booming explosion. I've also heard people mention that specific scene as like a childhood awakening of a fetish. They're like, oh my God, I'm into this.
Also, seems like an obvious one when I think about it. Homer Simpson.
Oh yeah.
Homer Simpson just constantly just
100%.
Oh my God. What kind of role play scenarios exist for these different kinks? Or is it less of a role play thing? Because again, we've kind of touched on that conversation that there are these elements of being more sensual and intimate, which not to say it can't be role play,
right?
But I think maybe lend itself to be more in the moment rather than a specific role play to enact the thing.
There are definitely, I mean, it's a lot like gaming, and where like there are just moments, you know, as you're doing it, you're enjoying what's going on. But there are definitely specific role play scenarios that involve things like belching or farting or stomach gurgling and all of that. A lot of it does involve the leading up to it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I've done role play where you're at a bar and you're just drinking, and like you're physically being larger. You're physically like loading up with like the carbonation, the soda, whatever, and then going back to the apartment or the hotel room or the house, or whatever the fuck, and just like letting loose. That can be kind of a way of like role playing that and bringing all that together. Mm-hmm. There is also more of like an environment specific or like a scenario specific thing where like you're the coworker and the coworker had a lot to eat and he's like farting a lot because like, oh my God, but he's not ashamed of it. He's just doing it all the time. And like that, you know, that kind of thing also plays into it as well. Obviously, if we're talking about like vor, that's absolutely role play, you know? So all of that. It's not dissimilar from a lot of the gaming stuff, but it is very particular sometimes.
That makes sense. And I think we see plenty of examples of gamers being nitpicky about what they do and don't like, and the sort of, in some regards, being a little bit unyielding on that, which not that you should have to, you know, if it's your own desires, like cool, sure, whatever, but yeah.
It's always important that, again, like we keep saying, whenever it comes to things like role play or anything else involving other people, consent and communication, conversation is fucking key. It is so key.
So here's a question for you. If I were interested in diddling my skittle to some horns, shall we say, of that variety, where would one go to find such content?
Well, you can find it on most, honestly, general porn sites, things like Visvid, PornHub. If you want to even go on YouTube, you know how like, there's like YouTube gamer porn? There's
Yeah.
things on YouTube, all of which I'm actually on. So if you want to go on there and check out my shit, you definitely can.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Not
So
someone promoting their content on our podcast. We've never had such a flagrant use of airtime.
oh no. Oh my
What
shocking.
a liberty.
So if you look up beargrowlr, so bear like the animal, growler like the app, no relation. Anything under that name is all of my explicit content involving things with sense and sounds for the most part. You can also go on beargrowlr.com. That's the website that I use to share all the content I have, or on Twitter as well. I'm on Twitter as twitter.com/beargrowlr as well.
Wait, like beargrowlr almost kind of feels like a...
Yeah. So please, Growler, don't sue me. And if you're listening to this, don't get the legal team to fucking sue me. So essentially what happened is I needed a username for what was at the time, I believe, the beginning of my PornHub page or something.
Right.
And for some reason, the full word growler was not allowed. And then on Instagram, beargrowlr with the E was also not allowed. So I just took away the E and hoped no one found out. And then I started making content that everyone knows. So it was a complete accident. Absolutely no relation. But that is why that is how it is.
Absolutely. But for more specific details, you will need to subscribe to Abe's Patreon first in order to get the full hyperlink to those other addresses, because a bitch deserves to make her coin first. Now, we do have a couple of listener questions for you if you're feeling up to it.
Absolutely.
So the first one here reads, I used to think my appreciation for this fetish was weird, but recently I'm meeting more and more people who are into it. Do you think more people are discovering the fetish, or has it always been more common, just less spoken about?
I think this has always been more common, to be honest with you. I'm remembering the first time I had any reaction or any kind of emotion towards kink or fetish specific thing when it comes to like belching or even just gaming in general. And I was young. I was super young. Like I remember being 6 years old, knowing, oh, this feels weird. Why does that feel weird? And later on realizing, okay, this is what it was. I feel like it's very much common, and only recently, because of the internet and the ability to look up things that you may not have known in the past, more and more people are discovering that this is a thing. Also, just exposure. I feel like more people that are online talking about it, more people will also be like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I'm feeling. You know what I mean? I talked to some people who have told me, I did not think I was into this until I heard you. And I was like, oh shit, this is hot. I'm like, cool. I'm glad I helped you discover something about yourself. You know?
Like it almost kind of invites that idea of, like I've said before about my mother's cooking and thinking, oh, I thought I hated cake. I thought I hated certain food, but it just turns out my mother's shit cook. But because I had the opportunity to try it again, made by someone who knew what they were doing, I was able to then go, oh, turns out I like this. And so sometimes maybe someone just needs a good introduction to solid belching, farting, stomach noises, and zen play for them to go, oh,
I see the appeal.
I see the appeal.
And I enjoy the appeal.
Well, other question here is, I'm personally not into the kink, but some of those I've encountered who are very insistent on integrating it. How do I best navigate this?
We always want to focus on consent when it comes to this.
Amen.
I have met people who are very, very, very insistent in moments where even I don't want to do this. It's like, hey, I just kind of want to do anything else except this. It's always, they should not be insisting, like there is like a limit there, and knowing how consent applies in that situation is super important. Like I said in the past,
Yeah.
have that conversation. Like, what do you like? What can I do? And if I can't satisfy a thing that you need, then either we can cooperate on changing up the scene, changing up what we're doing, or you can find someone else.
Boom.
But it's super important to stay grounded in what you feel comfortable doing and saying. Let no one tell you to do something that you don't feel comfortable doing. That's the main thing when it comes to anything involving kink. You know,
that makes sense.
That's also easier said than done. It's a hard conversation to have.
Yeah, and you get caught up in the moment and feel how you feel.
Right. Absolutely. So it does take practice. Like anything else, having those hard conversations is a skill, but
people get there in time. And I kind of want to ask you this: where do you think it's all going? You know, I think a lot of us can appreciate that with the advent of things like TikTok and different mediums, you know, different kinks and fetishes are really getting their time in the sun. They're really getting showcased, and I don't necessarily think in a bad way. I think some of them are really getting a lot of good hype, and people are really jumping on the bandwagon. Like, what do you see in the future for things like scent play and sound play?
It's interesting. I do feel like more recently there has been like an uptick of knowledge of what that even is, you know, like a lot of people, as much as they may not like to acknowledge it, they're aware that like these kinks exist. So that's cool. I feel like the exposure that we're getting through like TikTok and even things like YouTube, Instagram, even I've seen some people post on Instagram knowing that it's a kink for other people, but like not saying it, but they know their audience. It will help more people find out what they're into, you know. The exact same way of how I found out that I was into caning, right? By seeing people eat and being like, oh shit, this is a thing that I really enjoy, and they were enjoying themselves. So that's that exposure. I also kind of worry about just general hate and harassment that happens whenever any kind of kink is like brought into the mainstream. Like we've all received it. Like everyone here in this call has received it, you know, and that definitely kind of sucks. And it can be harmful, but I also think that the exposure can be in some ways good. So it's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways, because there's also the like employment thing too. Like if you are making content like this and an employer sees this and they have, at least here in the States, all right to like deny you employment, because technically it's like sexual solicitation, you know. So
I see.
So double-edged sword.
Well, look, before we wrap things up, Tim, I just want to throw to you briefly, because I know you haven't, I think, maybe had much. You kind of said before, you didn't necessarily feel like this was your episode to really speak.
I feel like I don't really have a dog in this fight. So, and I feel bad that, you know, the listeners haven't really heard much from me, but I also, it's like, I'm not really sure what I can add to the conversation.
Well, you know, maybe that's an important point, because I think people have been saying to us, you know, like they'll come across certain episodes on the rotor and they'll go, oh, this theme, well, I'm not going to listen to that one because it's not really of interest to me to listen about this. There will probably be people who will see the title and go, oh, no, thank you, which, you know, fair, you know, do what you will. But maybe I'd like to throw to you to say, like, as someone who doesn't have a dog in this fight, as someone who isn't in the know, like, what is one thing that maybe you're most curious about when it comes to all of this?
I guess just how it develops, you know, how someone gets into it, you know, which I'm sure has the same impetus as every other fetish that a person gets into. You're exposed to something at some point and part of your lizard brain becomes interested, and before you know it, it's the whole thing. I guess just because, you know, everyone who's listening to this podcast knows that I work in healthcare and I work almost exclusively with the elderly. So like a lot of this stuff kind of reminds me of being at work. And it's, not something that it's like, it's like I don't want to think about work when I'm at home.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, when it comes to like when we eventually talk about ABDL, again, as a person who has to change those on a human being who's like 85, I don't see the appeal, but it's a thing and I'm not judging it.
I think that makes perfect sense, and maybe that's where we're going to leave off this week's episode. Abe, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you?
So my general civilian / kind of aner at this point Instagram is Sneaky Seabear. You can follow me on there. You can DM me on there if you want. Everything else more explicit, belching inclusive, but also just all sexual stuff. Twitter, beargrowlr, no spaces, no E at the end. PornHub, ThisVid, like I said, beargrowlr is still on all of those. beargrowlr.com/vids if you want to see the videos or buy the videos. And yeah, that is where I am.
Love that. Well, that's it. That's a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a good review. If you like this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. As always, you can find me on Grommr, Instagram, and TikTok at stannnum, and Twitter and YouTube at stannnumg.
You can find me on Grommr as Orpheus. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at ThickyMouse. And of course, you can find more of what we've talked about today on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Patreon at Thicc Radio. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stannnum and Thicky Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.